Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate Day 358, Saturday, February the 24th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, we talked about a story yesterday that was very disturbing, and at least for me it was, and I'm sure for many of you. And we have some even more disturbing news about that story. But before I get to that, that was all fresh in my mind yesterday when I did that video, and now I've had a night to sleep on it and all day to think about it, and it just popped into my mind today that we learned about this school resource officer being on the premises and not going in and attempting to stop the shooter. But I thought about this today, and I thought, this shooting occurred about 3 or 4 days ago, and we're just now hearing about this school resource officer? Why the delay? Shouldn't we have known about this school resource officer within the first few hours? Why did it take so long to learn about this school resource officer? Certainly, the sheriff and his department knew that they had a school resource officer who was armed at that school. I'm certain they knew that. So it seems to me that as soon as this event transpired, that one of the very first people that you would want to speak with if you're the sheriff is your school resource officer, the deputy sheriff who was on site. One of the very first people you would want to talk to would be your own man on the inside. Hey, tell me what happened. What went on there? But that's not what happened. We didn't hear anything about the school resource officer until 3 days after this event went down. Why? It almost looks like they didn't want us to know about him, because it is quite embarrassing, is it not? But he had to know eventually that this would get out. I mean, there's a lot of people who knew that he had a school resource officer in there, a deputy sheriff on the site. And it should be also noted that he was there with his official police car. Now, I have a couple of friends who are cops. I have a brother-in-law who's a cop. I have a cousin who's a high-level cop. Started out working the streets as an undercover narc cop, worked his way through law school. He's got a master's degree, and he's working his way up. He's pretty high up here in at the Cincinnati Police Department. I don't know his exact title. I haven't talked to him in a couple years, maybe 2 years. But my mom told me he's doing very well, working his way pretty high up. I'm very familiar with police cars. Like I said, I got a couple friends who are cops. They almost always have, at the very least, a shotgun right in the front seat with them. They have a shotgun. Most cops carry at least 2 guns on them. Their service weapon on their hip, and they usually carry a second and sometimes even a third weapon. My brother-in-law carries 3. He's got one in his .40 cal in his service weapon. He has another behind his back in a back holster. It's kind of hidden. That's the one he wears when he's out in public in civilian clothes. And he also keeps one on his ankle. Many of these cops have semi-autos in their trunk, rifles. Maybe a department-issued semi-auto, which is typically the AR-15, but they're allowed to have their own rifle in the trunk with them, if they like, in their cruisers. No doubt that he had, at the very least, he had a shotgun, as well as a service weapon, and probably a semi-auto rifle in his trunk or something like that. Certainly, the department has semi-auto rifles. But it's very interesting that it took 3 days to learn about this school resource officer. We should have learned about that in the first few hours. Now, a lot of people are suggesting, and it certainly looks like, especially in the information I'm about to give you, that there may have been a stand down. We hear that term a lot, and sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not. But there was a comment made by one of my favorite commenters and one of my favorite subs on my YouTube channel here. Many of you are familiar with her, Patty, and she's obviously been a teacher for many, many years in the public school system. And she made a comment that I'm sure some of you read, and I asked her a question. I'm hoping she responds to it, where she suggested that the school administrators can overrule the school resource officer or law enforcement officer, or even though, I think what she's suggesting is that even though you have a actual deputy sheriff, police officer, whatever, in the school, maybe armed, working for the police department and the school, that ultimately the superintendent or the administrator of the school or the school board actually has the ability to, I assume what she's saying, override law enforcement or their policies or practices or procedures about what they can do and not do. That is a very interesting thing, because what if we find out that the officer was acting according not to what the police would normally do or the sheriff's department, but what the school administration allows him to do? Now, I don't know this to be a fact. It's just something that Patty suggested, and having been a teacher for many years, she would know these things. It's worth looking into. And there needs to be a lot more questions asked. Obviously, within the first week, it's nothing but the debate between gun rights and taking away all the guns or whatever. This always is the heated debate for the first week. And the second week is when you start getting those more deeper questions that are important questions that need to be asked. And I certainly hope this is one of them that somebody probes. And I would like to know that, but it would seem to me that the policies of the school administration, or whatever, how the school resource officer acts on school grounds and these types of things, I can see where that would fall into their purview. But once a crime has been committed, I don't know that the school board has much to say about that, because once a crime has been committed, it's a criminal issue, it's a law enforcement issue, and I would be blown away to find out that the sheriff's department has to get permission from the school administrator to act once they observe a crime in progress. Very, very interesting. Whether or not this was a stand down, who issued it, I don't know. These are the questions that need to be asked in the week coming up, and I hope they will be. Now, the second story, which ties into this story, is going to blow your mind even more. If you thought you had your mind blown yesterday, wait till you hear this. It's even more maddening. Amber Athey at the Daily Caller, writing a story based on a segment that Jake Crapper of CNN did, where he lays out in his story that this school resource officer was not the only one on scene as that event was going down. He was there first. He was there even prior to it going down. He was just there. But once the shooting started, and I assume the school resource officer or someone contacted the sheriff's department, within a few moments, not very long, just after the event began, 4 more deputy sheriffs arrived on the scene, where they joined the school resource officer, getting out of their cars, pulling out their weapon, and then crouching down behind their cars. So it wasn't just one deputy sheriff that did not go in. It was 5 deputy sheriffs that did not go in. It was officers from the surrounding community, or a neighboring community called Coral Springs, which arrived on the scene. And when they arrived on the scene, they say they were stunned to see that the deputy sheriffs were crouched down behind their cars. So the 4 Coral Springs officers arrive, and they immediately observe the sheriffs hiding behind their police cars with their guns drawn. They look at these guys like, what the hell are you doing? And they, the Coral Springs police officers, first entered the school. And shortly after they entered the school, 2 more deputy sheriffs arrive, and they follow behind the 4 Coral Springs police officers who had already entered the school. There was also another cop from a neighboring force from Sunrise, Florida, who also immediately entered the school upon arrival on the scene. Now, this has caused a bit of an issue because it appears that the police chief of Coral Springs is pretty steamed after watching the interviews with the sheriff, Israel. And I think he's a little miffed because Sheriff Israel was trying to make it look like it was his officers who went in and took care of the situation, which really miffed this police officer, police chief from Coral Springs, because his officers told him a different story. They said, no, sir, when we got there, those deputy sheriffs were crouched behind their police cars. We're the guys who went in. We're the first ones that got into the school. So that police chief now in Coral Springs wants that truth to be told. I would highly recommend Sean Hannity or someone with a national audience, Tucker Carlson maybe, interview those 4 cops or the police chief or all of them from Coral Springs. Maybe we'll get the real truth. And I can understand his position. His officers are the ones who arrive there. They go in, risk their lives. Yet we hear nothing of them from the sheriff, from Sheriff Israel. He doesn't even say, yeah, we'd like to thank the neighboring police department. Their guys came in, police officers came in, and they were actually the first to enter the school. That's what he should have said. But that's not what he said. So, like a lot of you, I'm beginning to have a lot of problems with Sheriff Israel. We know he's a Hillary Clinton supporter, posed in a photograph with her. We know he donated to her. We know he's a left-wing social justice warrior sheriff. Did he give a stand-down order? I don't know. But we know his officers, and that makes me very skeptical, because if you just told me one police officer did it, that's a tragedy, and it's nearly impossible to believe. But we know what happened. But when you tell me that 4 more cops, deputy sheriffs, show up, and now you've got 5, and all of them failed to enter the school, that almost suggests that they were told to stand down, or they were being instructed, or someone was instructing them not to enter the school. Because here we have 4 police officers who come from a neighboring community, actually 5, because you had the one also from Sunrise, Florida. As soon as they hit the pavement, their car rolls up, door opens up, pew, they dart into the school. Waste no time. They're just looking at the deputy sheriffs like, what the hell are you doing? Someone needs to interview these cops from Coral Springs and the cop from Sunrise and the sheriff or the police chief there from Coral Springs. Because apparently this Sheriff Israel is not a straight shooter. He goes 3 days without even telling us that there was a school resource officer, and then all of a sudden he comes out and tells us, probably because he couldn't keep it quiet. Too many people knew about it. He probably did want to keep that quiet. It's quite embarrassing. But now it's even more embarrassing that we learn from the Coral Springs Police Department that when they arrived on scene, there were 5 deputy sheriffs there, crouching behind their car. Trey Gowdy, the pit poodle. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Here's a trivia question for all of you. Who hired Trey Gowdy, who first hired him to be a federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice? Who was it that hired Trey Gowdy when he got his start with the federal government? Who hired him to be a federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice? President Bill Clinton. Here's another trivia question for you. Trey Gowdy, this is a true or false question. True or false? Trey Gowdy supports a new investigation of the rotten Reverend Clinton, crooked Hillary, of her emails. Trey Gowdy supports a new investigation, reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. True or false? False. There are 3 YouTube video clips where we hear Trey Gowdy say he does not support reopening the Hillary Clinton email investigation. There's also another video where he speaks lovingly of President Clinton for appointing him to his first position as a federal prosecutor with the DOJ. He talks about knowing Huma, knowing Cheryl Mills, thinking they're very fine people. He talks about his good friendship with Elijah Cummings. Have you all caught his act? And Gowdy says that they only fight in front of the cameras when C-SPAN's watching. That other than that, behind closed doors, they're great friends. The pit poodle. Hey, hey! Trey Gowdy. You ought to see the look on Nunes' face in one of them videos as Trey Gowdy says he's not interested in reopening or rejudicating the Hillary Clinton email investigation. The look on Nunes' face tells you everything you need to know. Michael Moore claims the NRA is worse than ISIS. I would like to put a challenge to Michael Moore. Maybe we can arrange a dinner with Michael Moore in the NRA, and he can sit around and discuss the issues he has with them. I'm sure that Wayne LaPierre would sit around, have dinner with Mike and say, you know, Mike, I'd like to hear from people on the other side of the issue. I'd like to have a discussion with you. Maybe we can find some common ground. Maybe you can convince me. Maybe I can convince you. Let's have a conversation, Mike. I'm a reasonable man. Maybe you're a reasonable man. Let's go ahead and do that. And then let's let Michael Moore go over to wherever he can find some ISIS fighters who have not been killed by Trump, and let him sit around the table and talk with ISIS and share his views with ISIS and see how reasonable they are. And let's put that to the test and see if the NRA is worse than ISIS. My guess is that Michael Moore would have his fat, ugly head on a stick in minutes, especially because I believe he's transgendering. And as soon as ISIS got a look at him, I'm sure they would figure out what his situation is. And that would probably be the end of that dinner for Mike. He might end up being dinner. Maybe for a crocodile. Throw him off a building, burn him at the stake, burn him alive. Who knows what they would do to him. But I would certainly love to put that together for Michael Moore. Or deport him back to Canada. Unfortunately, Canada probably doesn't want him. I know a lot of my Canucks that subscribe to this channel don't want him back there. They want him to stay here. Susan Rice's attorney has now responded to Devin Nunes' letter. And she says that the Obama administration was afraid to share classified information with members of the incoming Trump administration and Michael Flynn. Well, that's interesting. He's elected president. You're the administration going out. He's the administration coming in. And you're basically saying, well, we're not really going to share intel with him. That doesn't sound good. Rice's lawyer also says that Rice was not informed about any FISA applications sought by the FBI in its investigation, and that she only learned about it from news reports. That's what Obama used to always say. I heard about it on the news, just like all of you. Bubba. That she learned about it on the news after leaving office, and that the dossier was never discussed in that January 5th meeting. Well, we know that Rice is a liar. We know that Brennan is a liar. We know that Comey is a liar. They've all been caught lying many times. We know that John Brennan was in that meeting on January 5th, and we know that Brennan did brief Obama on the dossier. And we know that Comey was in that meeting on January 5th, and we know that the very next day, he briefed Trump on the dossier. So we're supposed to believe that Rice is in this meeting on the 5th with Comey, talking about the Russia investigation and how Obama's not going to meddle in it. And then the very next day, Comey briefs Trump on the dossier, but we're told that in that meeting on January 5th, nothing was discussed about the dossier. Do you believe that? I don't think anybody believes that. I know Devin Nunes isn't going to believe that. It's that game of, that lawyerly game of, well, if you can't prove it, I didn't do it. Oh yeah, I did it, but you got to prove it, and you can't. That's what she's saying. Her lawyer also says that the letter that she wrote 2 weeks after the fact is not all that unusual, and she did it just for memorabilia, for history, so that for history's sake, she would remember or have some recollection of something of what occurred in that meeting. It was all for history's sake, for the memories. Memories, like the corners of her mind, misty watercolor memories. Yeah, it brings a tear to my eye. But honestly, Rice is a liar. She's been caught lying many times. Brennan has just recently been caught lying, and now he's on the hot seat. We know that Comey's been caught lying 4 times, and they're lying about this. Nunes is not going to believe a single word of this, and neither do I. I'm sure most of you don't either. Ridiculous. Speaking of Nunes, his committee is now looking into whether the Obama administration's Joint Intel Analysis Report, claiming Putin ordered Hillary's email, was hacked and leaked by the Russians to help Trump. Now, we talked about this back at the time when it came out. It was a big deal. This was the report that was put out, was based on intelligence from Brennan, CIA, Comey, FBI, and Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence. They put out this joint intelligence statement, this document, which laid out the case that the case it was making pretty much was that Putin ordered the hacking of the DNC and Hillary Clinton's private server to get the emails so that they could be used, could be released, could be used to help Trump. And so, based on that, the investigation moved forward to see if anyone in the Trump campaign was working with Putin or was aware of this or taking part in this in some way. So it was this intelligence report which substantiated the activities that would then follow and had actually already been going on previous by the FBI, by the CIA, and apparently by the DOJ and others. But this was the report that justified it all. So now Devin Nunes is looking into that intelligence report. Because now, in hindsight, with things that we know now that we didn't know then when the report was written, it appears to show some inconsistencies, particularly with Brennan's statement, which is that he said that he did not know who was the author of the dossier at the time that this was put together, and that would include Clapper. But we know Comey had to know at that time who wrote the dossier or who paid for the dossier. And how is it possible that they could sit around and have a joint meeting and Comey know who wrote the dossier, who paid for the dossier, but yet Clapper and Brennan claim to be ignorant about who? Because remember, we didn't know at the time that this report came out that it was paid for by Hillary and written by Steele, or composed by Steele, or compiled by Steele, whatever you want to say. So Nunes has went back and looked at this report, and now he's analyzing it compared to what we know now that we didn't know then when the report was first written. And it raises a lot of questions, and that's why Brennan was one of the people, along with Clapper, who received Nunes' letter about what did you know about the dossier, when did you know it, who did you share it with, how did you learn about it, and what form did that take, did you share it with anyone else, did they share it with you? All those questions we went through here 2 days ago. Both Clapper and Brennan got that letter. They still have not responded. As far as I know, Susan Rice is now the first one to respond, and she responds by lying. So we will continue to watch this, but what's really important about this is that it's questions like this and looking into that is what might get us on the real blood trail at the origin of all this. The legitimacy of all this is based on the fact that Russia hacked the DNC, but they could not prove in this intelligence report that that was the case. They said, we're pretty sure, we're kind of sure. Mike Rogers of the NSA wouldn't even go that far. He didn't even participate because I assume he didn't want to. He didn't want to be in on this cabal. He didn't want to say, yeah, I agree, the Russians hacked the DNC. He didn't want to go there. So he was left out. But now that Nunes is probing this deeper, it begins to go back to the original question. What is actually, has it ever been proven that the Russians hacked the DNC server? The government never looked at it, only CrowdStrike. And they've backed away from their claims. So this could get us back into where we should have been a long time ago, asking the questions, okay, if all this is based on the Russians hacking the DNC and no government agencies ever looked at those servers, isn't it about time we did that? Now, I've heard Nunes ask a question about that, and I didn't like his response. He kind of said, well, you know, I've been on the Intel Committee for a long time. I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports about the Russians meddling in our elections and things, in our politics, and I know that that is all true. So I know that's all true. And then he kind of moved on from there back into what he was talking about. He didn't necessarily say that he's not interested in looking or examining the DNC server. He didn't exactly say he agrees with CrowdStrike. He didn't really go there. That's the questioner was actually trying to pin him down on that. But he didn't really go there. He kind of responded by saying, I think the way he kind of took the question was that the guy asking the question to him was suggesting that the Russians had no part in it. And I think Nunes was just trying to say to him, hey, to say that the Russians had no part in meddling in our elections or our politics or whatever is crazy. I've seen hundreds of reports, intel reports, that prove they do, and they have, and they continue to. But they always have. That's not a big secret. And we meddle in theirs. But as far as actually drilling down on it, Nunes might find himself getting there, and I hope he does. Because when we finally, if we can ever ask that question, and ever get to that point, say, you know what? We really need to go back and take a look at those DNC servers and really find out who got in there. And I don't even know if you can tell. Because anybody can leave the fingerprints of another country there. You know, you can leave Chinese fingerprints there, Iranian fingerprints there, Israeli fingerprints there, Brit fingerprints there. You can leave someone else's fingerprints there. The CIA can do that. And other foreign governments can do it as well. when you get into that kind of stuff, it's really hard to tell exactly what did happen. And that's probably why they're not very confident about it. It's a guess. But their guess led to everything else they did. And in the process of making that report, that joint analysis intel report, in doing so, they seem to have perjured themselves because they didn't know when they wrote the report what we'd find out a year and 2 months later is that Hillary paid for it and Comey knew it, and that Steele was the guy who compiled it and Comey knew it, but yet Brennan and Clapper pretend that they didn't. How can Brennan, Clapper, and Comey sit around and have this deep discussion, all this deep intel, and then Brennan and Clapper come out of the meeting not knowing it was Steele, not knowing it was the Right Reverend Clinton that paid for it, when in fact the guy they're in the meeting with, Comey, knew it? That didn't come up? That didn't come up? Nobody believes that. And that's why Nunes sent that letter to Clapper and Brennan. Oops, out of time. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow, and hopefully I'll be done with my research to do my frame-up video. Talk to you then. Bye.